We've all faced uncertain times. Moments when the future felt impossible to predict, when fear gripped entire communities. But could you imagine a pandemic that didn't just threaten your town, it erased entire cities from the map? That didn't just challenge your way of life, it shattered every foundation of society itself. Between 1347 and 1353, the world faced its darkest hour. An invisible enemy swept across continents with terrifying speed. No army could fight it. No prayer could stop it. The Black Death killed more than 75 million people. In some regions, half the population simply vanished. You think you know this story. A plague that killed millions and then faded into history. But what if I told you that this catastrophe didn't just end civilization as people knew it? What if it actually ignited a revolution? What if the darkest period in human history became the forge that shaped the modern world? This is the story of the silent conqueror. And it's a story about you. The year is 1347. Merchant ships arrive in the Sicilian port of Messina. The sailors are sick, covered in mysterious black boils, burning with fever. The harbor master orders the ships to leave, but it's too late. The disease has already come ashore. The plague had started years earlier in Central Asia, traveling along the Silk Road. History often simplifies it to rats and fleas, but the bacterium Yersinia pestis had three terrifying forms. Bubonic plague caused the horrific swellings. Septicemic plague infected the bloodstream, turning flesh black. And pneumonic plague attacked the lungs, spreading from person to person through the air itself. No medical knowledge of the time could explain it. Physicians wore bizarre bird-like masks, but it was useless. What made the Black Death truly unprecedented was its speed. A person could wake up healthy and be dead by nightfall. The great writer Giovanni Boccaccio wrote of parents abandoning sick children and bodies piled in the streets because there weren't enough living to bury the dead. In England, entire villages were abandoned. In some regions of Europe, up to 60% of the population died within months. Panic spread as fast as the disease. By 1353, when the plague finally began to recede, the world had changed forever. For nearly 1,000 years, European society had been locked in a rigid feudal system. If you were born a peasant, you died a peasant. The system was absolute. Until it wasn't. When half the workforce died, everything changed. Suddenly, there weren't enough hands to work the fields. Lords who had commanded dozens of workers now struggled to find anyone. And those who survived realized something powerful: they had leverage. For the first time, ordinary people could negotiate. A farmer could say, "Pay me more, or I'll work for your neighbor." The old system was broken. This shift planted the first seeds of social mobility. The rigid class structure began to crack. But it wasn't just economic power that shifted. Traditional authority itself began to crumble. The church had promised protection, but the plague killed bishops and beggars alike. People began to ask dangerous questions. If the church couldn't protect us, what good is it? If clergy are as vulnerable as anyone else, are they really closer to God? These were cracks in the foundation of medieval authority, cracks that would lead to the Reformation and the questioning of absolute monarchy. Before the plague, Europe's agriculture was inefficient. With half the workers gone, farmers began diversifying. Instead of just growing wheat, they raised livestock like sheep and cattle, which required fewer workers but were more profitable. Peasants began to think like business people. New trade routes emerged. Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa grew even more powerful, becoming financial centers. Banking systems became more sophisticated, and the concept of insurance emerged. Here's something remarkable: with fewer people but the same amount of wealth, survivors found themselves relatively richer. This created something medieval Europe had rarely seen: disposable income. People wanted better clothes, better food, better homes. A consumer economy creates jobs, drives innovation, and breaks down class distinctions because wealth, not just birth, begins to matter. The plague had inadvertently created economic mobility on a scale never before seen. The Black Death didn't just kill bodies. It shattered certainties. Medieval Europe had built its worldview on the Church's teachings. Life was suffering, but salvation awaited. Then came the plague, and none of it made sense anymore. Why did the righteous die while sinners survived? From this crisis emerged a new kind of faith. People began focusing on personal relationships with God, rather than relying on the institutional church. This shift toward personal piety would eventually fuel the Protestant Reformation. Art also reflected this changed world. After the plague, art became obsessed with death. The danse macabre, the dance of death, appeared everywhere. Paintings showed skeletons dancing with kings and peasants, bishops and beggars. The message was clear: death comes for everyone. But there was something else in this art, too. A brutal honesty that, paradoxically, made life feel more precious. If death can come at any moment, then the present moment matters. This new awareness became a cornerstone of Renaissance thinking. By the early 1400s, less than a century after the plague, something extraordinary was happening in Italy. This was the Renaissance, and its roots reached back to the Black Death. The plague had disrupted the old order so completely that new ideas could flourish. The accumulation of wealth created patrons for artists and scholars. The questioning of church authority created space for secular learning. The plague forced Europe out of the Middle Ages and into modernity. One of the most lasting impacts came in how societies thought about disease. The explanations were all wrong, but some cities began to take practical measures. Venice established the first quarantine system in 1377. Milan closed its city gates and enforced strict isolation. This pragmatic approach was the beginning of empirical public health. It planted the seeds for the scientific method: observe, hypothesize, test, learn. Here's what the Black Death ultimately revealed: humans don't just endure catastrophe, we adapt. We innovate. We transform. The survivors created new economic systems because the old ones didn't work. They questioned authority because blind faith had failed them. They valued life differently because they'd seen how quickly it could end. From the ashes of the worst disaster in human history came social mobility, economic innovation, artistic brilliance, and the foundations of modern science. Not despite the catastrophe, but because of it. You are the descendant of plague survivors. Think about that. Your ancestors, hundreds of years ago, lived through humanity's darkest hour. They watched loved ones die. They faced uncertainty every single day. They had every reason to give up. But they didn't. They buried their dead, and then they planted crops for the next season. That resilience. It's in your DNA. That adaptability. It flows through your veins. Every major crisis in history follows a pattern. Catastrophe, adaptation, and finally, transformation. The Black Death transformed feudalism. World War II led to the United Nations. The Great Depression birthed social safety nets. We're not celebrating catastrophes. We're recognizing that humanity can emerge stronger, wiser, and more innovative. Whatever you're facing right now, whatever feels overwhelming, remember this: your challenges are real, but you come from a lineage of survivors who faced the unimaginable and prevailed. The Black Death taught us that endings can be beginnings. That collapse can lead to renewal. That the darkest moments can forge the brightest futures. History isn't just about the past. It's a mirror showing us who we are. The story of the Black Death is about the human spirit, our capacity to endure, adapt, and thrive against impossible odds. We don't just survive the impossible, we rise from it, stronger than before. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it. And if you want to explore more lessons from history that inspire resilience, there's more waiting for you here. Thanks for watching.